Welcome, everyone. I'm Sherry Lassiter from the Fab Foundation. My co-hosts today are Jean-Luc Pierite. Jean, give a wave for us, and also Greg Almieda, who is with the Global Visions Corporation, which really works on diversity and inclusion strategy. And so these are my partners today, as well as all of you who are in the room. This started a while ago. This whole session was somewhat inspired by the work that a lot of us have been doing, both in the United States and across the world, but it was really, I think, triggered by the recent events in the United States around race, right? So we had George Floyd in Minnesota, who was brutally murdered by the police. We had Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, Mr. Arby and Rayshard Brooks in Georgia. You know, all of this on top of COVID-19. And, it was a real tipping point for issues around white supremacy and racism in the United States. Now, so that's really what kind of tipped us over into really wanting to move forward and be active about diversity and inclusion in our spaces. And our first conversation really happened July 2nd, and it was hosted by Nation of Makers, by Dorothy and Dorothy Jones Davis and Nation of Makers. And that was a conversation specifically around race and inclusion in the maker movement. And it was in collaboration with a really interesting coalition of partners across the field of making. It was Tikon Alom Makers. They had a workshop this morning. If you got to see that, they're extraordinary. Open source medical supplies, citizen schools, Maker Ed, the Make community, and of course, Fab Foundation. And so this coalition, we really are interested in having an ongoing conversation, because this is actually not a new conversation for us, right? So if you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen really briefly with you. Oh, there's Dorothy. Hey, Dorothy. So just a reminder of, some of the events that have really inspired us to get started and really move into action now. But this was a report that was done, I believe, in 2014 during the Obama administration. And Intel did a really nice deep dive into the maker movement, into making, and who was getting engaged in terms of male versus female and who was not. And I think if I remember correctly, the conclusion from this was that female participation in makerspaces was terrible at the time. It was like, I don't know, 20%, 25%, something like that. Dorothy, pipe in if you if you remember. And then I want to fast forward, this is in 2018. And this is EdSurge. This is a company that actually a former journalist friend of mine started. But the problem is the same, 4 years later. And this is just around, gender. It's not, no more diverse than male, female, right? And then our academic papers even, let's see if I can find the right one. This is an academic paper also from 2018 that was really looking at how makerspaces and fab labs, contribute to diversity and inclusion in engineering, specifically because there's a lot of interest in getting, diversity into STEM careers, right? And so I want to show you this really interesting table here that tracks 2012, 14, and 15 Maker Faire participants, right? And if you look at 2012, 61% male, and in 2015, it was 62% male. So there was no change, right, over that 3-year period. The median household income went from 108,000 to 124,000. So that's not a good sign, right? And this is, this is all of us. I'm not saying it's like, this is makerspaces, tech shop, fab labs, hacker spaces, all of us are in this together, right? In terms of education, 96% attended college in 2015. And then if you look down at race, it was 67% white, 12% Asian, 7% Hispanic Latino, 3% Black African American, and 14% that didn't want to report, right? That's not I think that all of us believe that we want to serve a really different community, right? That we want to serve a much more inclusive and diverse community. But it takes a lot of work to be inclusive. Inclusivity is not just saying I'm going to be inclusive and I'm going to be diverse. You have to recognize sort of the systemic things that are going on around you, that are in your culture, both personally and organizationally. And that's hard work. I know for me personally, just around race, I'm a Southern white woman, and I came from the Deep South, and we had very, very deeply learned culture around race that I had to unlearn, and that I'm still unlearning, and it's a messy process. But I think that both myself and my organization are going to be much better off when I get through the process, right? And so for me, that's what today is about, is us starting to explore what are the barriers that we that we bring either personally or through our organizations or through our culture, to our labs, and how does that include or exclude, and how can we do that better? What are some of the things that people are doing already that really kind of address this in really interesting and good ways? And so that's why we're here today. I'd like to turn it over right now to Jean-Luc, who I think can talk about this from his own perspective in really important ways. So Jean-Luc, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Sure, thank you. So before I begin, just a bit of housekeeping. I am speaking from the city of Boston, which we recognize as the traditional indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation, who continue to this day through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapoag. Myself, I am also a guest on these lands. I'm originally from New Orleans. I'm a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana. And I currently work at the Fab Foundation as the International Logistics and Procurement Manager, which means that I just get like a whole bunch of like Fab Lab equipment, materials, and send them to wherever they need to go in the world. But also locally, I am the president of the board of directors at the North American Indian Center of Boston. So I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen on my end. So this conversation actually started for NACOB back. Well, I guess, the root of it, or sort of one of the flashpoints for this year, I should say, is the best way of saying that. We organized an observance of the 250th anniversary of the murder of Crispus Attucks. And this murder was actually something that was part of the Boston Massacre, and it was something that led towards the American Revolution. One of the facts that people don't necessarily recognize, when I was learning about this in New Orleans, we heard about Crispus Attucks, the Black man who was killed, which led to the American Revolution. But a lot of the time, his indigenous side was not always covered. But in using that historical point as a context, we actually brought that conversation forward and talked about the problem of police shootings and state violence within Black and Indigenous communities here in the United States. So for fans of GitHub, there is this repository from the Washington Post, which has data on police shootings since 2015. And you can see right here, the data point right now is that 5,489 people have been shot and killed by police since January 1st of that year. So anybody that's willing, that wants to go and dig into that data, you can go ahead and check out that GitHub repo and do a little digging for yourself. When the killing of George Floyd happened, and we saw a lot of the protests, but then also the riots that broke out in Minneapolis. One of the things, again, that we talk about when we talk about state violence against Black people and Indigenous people as well, is sort of that intertwined nature of how the social issues impact both constituencies and sort of the intersection of the violence. So this is an example. During those riots in Minneapolis, the youth center, McGitsy Communications, was set fire and was burned down as a result of being in the crossfire of those riots. It wasn't necessarily something that was intentionally done, but that was something that we had learned later on after after we were getting processed what was actually going on, both nationally and locally. But that became sort of a cause of alarm for North American Indian Center of Boston to kind of have some heightened security. Now, we had also already been in the Indian Center in Boston and Jamaica Plain on a limited basis, doing our PPE, face mask, production and distribution. We actually have a MOU with a local makerspace called Boston Makers. And it's through them, but then also through the help and guidance of the South End Technology Center that we were able to kind of train up community members and get into cutting out pieces for PPE, face mask production, and assembly within the Indian Center itself. So we had already been on site when all of this was happening, but it was cause for more alarm and heightened security when we became aware of this situation. Going out into the national and international scope, we started to see these examples of how the Black Lives Matter movement was resonating across borders. So you see an example here of the statue of King Leopold being defaced, and this is only one of the examples of statues that were either defaced or toppled internationally and as a result of Black Lives Matter. So we're starting to see not just the conversation on race and white supremacy within the United States, but the broader conversation internationally in terms of like colonialism and imperialism. So also, this also resonated for communities in other countries as well. So you saw Black Lives Matter translating into Papuan Lives Matter in other countries. So, you know, in many different ways, people were processing what was going on, not just the violence of what was going on, or, you know, the barriers, but how is this a sort of the ability to actually have challenges to social structures and systems. How is that actually empowering local communities to find solutions to the problems and the barriers that they experience? Coming back to the United States, and here in Boston in particular, the conversation around statues and symbols of white supremacy, and actually it broadened out to a deeper conversation about what public art and monuments actually mean. And so that got our community thinking about, you know, how do we respond when a situation like the Columbus statue in Boston's North End being toppled. This was something that wasn't necessarily done by any member of our community, and we have to this day not even verified if this was somebody associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. However, this was something that we felt the need to respond to and actually draw attention to even though these are very extreme and radical actions, this is something that is drawing attention to those broader conversations around colonialism, around white supremacy, around racism. Then it actually turned into what, as NACOP and our partner organizations, could do in order to sort of like leverage this ability of public art, of making, of creative expression, and to have a direct action in which we would symbolically dismantle white supremacy. So in the beginning of this month, there was an action called Dismantle Now, which was headed up by North American Indian Center of Boston. We brought in different elders and different representatives from different countries. We had people who were Bolivian, Peruvian, Brazilian, as you see, Maestra Isaura Oliveira. We had First Nations from Canada. We had Palestinians, and just kind of like bringing it all together, and of course African Americans from the local community in the city of Boston, basically to kind of drive home the point that we are in one struggle and one fight when it comes to these issues of white supremacy, colonialism, and imperialism and racism. I'm just gonna go ahead and, oops, oh no. Let me see if I can really quickly, there we go. Yeah, so here's another picture just to kind of show you part of the creative expression were umbrellas, which we had actually put the call out to say that, well, we have like elders and people with disabilities, so, and we're going to be marching, so to be mindful of that, and to also like have the extra feature of actually like kind of inherent social distancing. We asked people to decorate umbrellas instead of actually having like cardboard signs. And then one other thing that I wanted to talk about. So within the last 24 hours, the Massachusetts Senate, the state Senate of Massachusetts has unanimously passed a resolution to revise the state seal and motto. This is something that former Representative Byron Rushing had championed for almost 35 years. And as part of an indigenous-led coalition, we took up that bill and further advocated for it to its passage within the Senate. And you see the Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe of Punkapaug here. So just to kind of tie it, we're definitely in a moment where there's a lot of feelings, or there's a lot of like response as far as like, I don't feel safe, I'm unsure, but then there's also opportunity, and it relies upon the access to the tools and the ability for our communities to be civically engaged in order to actually advocate for the social interventions and changes that we that we really need. So with that, I'll just go into, toss it to Greg to lead us into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. That was a beautiful explanation of where we are, where we're going. And now Greg. So Greg's got a long time and a lot of experience working on diversity and inclusion with his company, Global Vision Communications. And Greg, we're gonna hand it over to you so that you can take us into this now second conversation with the community. And just to make it very clear to everyone, this is not necessarily just about racism. It's about inclusivity across Indigenous populations. It's across LGBTQ, different nationalities, different cultures, different classes, different physical abilities. We just need to think about all of the populations that we want to serve. And so I want to just kind of broaden the conversation there. So Greg, please take
Absolutely. So welcome to everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping things really quickly. My job today is to moderate the discussion. Technically, I'm a traffic cop. I just need to keep it moving, right? There's 44 of us on the call right now. There may be more that join. We have a couple of different ways for you all to be a part of this. One is to use the chat feature, which is going to be monitored by Sherry, Jean-Luc, and I believe one other person. And obviously, they will call out either your questions and or your comments. Or the other is to just use the raise your hand feature as part of this Zoom call. We have until 3 o'clock today to have this discussion. So I'm going to moderate for the next hour or so. Please feel free to participate. There's no right or wrong answers. There are some things that we're trying to agree on, but we're not trying to change anybody's mind about their perspective. So again, there's no right or wrong answers, and we really, really want you to participate as much as you feel comfortable. You know, Sherry and Jean-Luc just shared a lot of background and context, both from a national but from an international perspective on this. And I'm just curious how people are relating to the systemic issues around race and colonialism worldwide. When we all had the opportunity to sort of sit through and listen to Jean-Luc and Sherry's background and context, how do you guys relate to that those situations?
Should I call out people?
You can. Sure.
Pamela, are you there?
Why did I know that you were going to do that?
Because you are employee number one.
Okay. Well, what was the question? You want to know how does one feel about what Sherry and Jean-Luc just expressed?
Well, how do you relate to the information?
Right.
To the information? Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, I guess I come from I come from the civil rights era. That's how old I am. Here in Boston in the early 60s, we had freedom schools, where, we boycotted the schools here, and we had our own teachings, within churches or community centers throughout the city. And so, been dealing with a lot of this all my life. And so I think, I don't know, I look at what recently happened, and to me, the only, the reason that, all of a sudden it became out there is because of this pandemic. One of my colleagues, Rebecca, had said to me, did this come about all of a sudden, all this protest, everything coming out because we were all at home? We had nowhere to go. We had nothing else to keep our minds. And then we saw this horrible thing on TV. And, and then we learned about so many other events that have happened to Black people within the last few months, not just what happened to George Floyd, but happened to, and it's still happening. There have been even, as of last week. So to me, a lot of this stuff, as we talk about being inclusive, it's, I don't know, I'm tired of it because I feel like it's just something that should have been happening. Why do I have to wait until I'm 67 years old to feel included? Or that somebody else, that I have to teach somebody how what it's like to be me. I don't want that, and so I'm gonna I'll stop with a quote that Toni Morrison has quoted. And, you know, she was in an interview with Charlie Rose, and she said, you know, white people have serious problems, and that they need to figure out how to deal with it and leave me out of it. So that's just how I feel. You know, it's like, you know, I can listen to everybody. You know, we talk about, you know, like as far as the South End Technology Center, it has always been inclusive. You know, but it was initially started because of the lack of access to technology in the low income and the Black and brown communities. And so that was the main reason that that was started, but it also gave free access. You know, the digital fabrication came later, but as far as, you know, always being inclusive, that's been part of, you know, me. But there are other people who didn't want me to be included. So I can't, and that's their problem. I can't, you know, I'm not going to try and make somebody include me or like me. You know, that's their problem. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I think Jean-Luc started the random call out. So I'm going to take a stab at it. And I am going to ask Lydia Ford to weigh in on the question. Lydia, if you're talking, you might be on mute. Or do we have to unmute her?
It might not be Lydia, just so you know. It might just be her account, yeah.
Oh, understood. Got it. Okay. All right. How about Anita? Lars, I think you tried to unmute, or you did unmute.
Hey, I did. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody.
Lars, we're having bad
Lars
connection from your
with
side.
Allison's Asylum. It's good to see this conversation continue. All right. Well, I'll stop and try to jump back on. Thank you.
Okay. All right. How about Laurie G?
Hi. So I live here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so not so far from Boston. And I work at the Cambridge Public Library. I'm now, after 30 years of teaching, working at the library, helping to create a makerspace there that is inclusive for everyone. So in teaching, and even in raising my own kids, my 2 kids are biracial. This city has a lot to offer, and it has a lot of that it doesn't have to offer. There are a lot of barriers, and I see it through my kids' eyes, and I try to take that into account in what I can offer to my community to reach out. And some of the ways that I felt compelled to reach out to people was through, in teaching anyways, was through food and art and creativity and just kind of building community, and one by one, building trust and helping to facilitate programs that reached out to others. And I've worked with some of the folks here in this group, and they're fantastic. And once COVID hit, I felt like the remark that someone made about the movement more than the moment happening now is in part because I think people's lives slowed down finally to a pace where they had to accept the reality of the situation for people of color, that it's not always safe to just walk down the street, and it's, you know, there are just so many wrongs that can happen, and it's so unjust. And they had to have time, I think, to slow down in their own worlds and really feel the pain. And, you know, because those of us who know that pain know how easily it is to push it aside sometimes just to keep yourself going.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Latrice brings up a really nice, Latrice Gaskins brought up a really nice point in the chat, if you've had a chance to look, but she said, one of the things that we need to do is look at where fab and maker habits already exist in underrepresented communities. So, and create programs, you know, and projects within their sort of everyday practices, which I think is a really, really good point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Lars, and I hope if I keep it on audio will be better. I'll look to you, Dorothy, for the thumbs up there or something. Thanks, awesome. You know, I was really struck, some of you may have followed with me, Tom Cotton's remarks against the 1619 project being taught in public schools. And it made me realize how big this work is. You know, I think to Ms. King's point, this conversation has been going on for a long time. And the question is like, are we just another bump in a series of waves of interest, or are we going to identify the levers of structural change? And in a way, it seemed to me that COVID has been in our favor. It's enabled a lot of folks to take to the streets in ways that we might not have been able to if we had been in school, if we'd had to be at our jobs, things like that. And so I wonder what it is that we as makerspaces and the fab community can do to kind of lock in some of the benefits of the turmoil. And I know that that's a really rough-hewn way to say that, but in terms of expanding our access right now, free memberships, you know, volunteer opportunities, becoming a space for artists to make their stencils. You know, what is it that we can do to help sustain the movement would be one thing, because I think it has to be sustained. What principally a lot of young folks, but also with allies of older generations have been able to achieve is important. And seeing the federal response to Portland and other communities, I think shows how powerful the moment is. And I'd really encourage us as makerspaces to figure out how we can be a part of, you know, sort of ensuring that this movement doesn't subside, and have an intentional agenda. And perhaps it's a shared agenda, I don't know, but an intentional agenda, because the Tom Cottons of the world are powerful too. And I think if we underestimate their entrenchment and their denial of what a post-colonial world can look like, we're not going to get very far.
So Lars, what are you defining in your way? What are you defining as the movement? What are the elements that you're defining as the movement?
Sorry, Greg, I missed that last word. You said the elements that I'm defining
as the movement. How are you defining the movement?
Okay, off the cuff, right now, there is, at the macro level, a reparations bill. I don't know if folks are following this, but there's a reparations bill in front of Congress. And I think that reparations bill will gain a lot of momentum under Biden. I think it will lose momentum if Trump's reelected. So that's a big part of the macro level movement.
Lars, we lost you.
I think breaking it down to sort of matter. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Am I back on?
Yes, you are.
Let me take it to the chat. How's that? I apologize. I'm tethered off my.
No problem. Let me put that question to the group, because I think that there are sort of different perspectives on what the movement is, and I'd be just interested in hearing how people are sort of defining it, and I'll follow Jean-Luc's lead here and just seed the conversation with a couple of comments. Dorothy, would you mind weighing in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, and I mean, the comments that have been going in the chat. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Pamela, to Ms. King for saying what she said, because I think one of the things that's been a frustration is that this conversation and those of us that have a few more years on the clock, and that includes people that, obviously are ahead of me and having more knowledge in this world than I do, this is not the first rodeo show. And I do think that there's something that is annoying and disturbing and problematic, even in the context of how we're setting this up, that all of a sudden now this is when we can have this conversation. And I know that for me, as this has gone along, while I'm certainly glad that we're having these conversations now, that we're able to be aware and have these dialogues, and that, as Lars said, one of the benefits, I guess you could say, of COVID is that it has forced us to reconsider a lot of the choices we make in life and what role we have in changing the world around us. And that's in so many different ways, from the things that we make to the people that we engage with, to who we're supporting and who we're not, and why, and how we use social media and all these other things. But I am a little frustrated, and I think the thing that kind of digs at me, and I appreciate you for saying this because I thought it was just me, so I really appreciate hearing your voice and saying this, is that it feels frustrating that, all of a sudden now people have this moment, and now all of a sudden it matters somehow more, and now I'm being given permission to say that, what I've been saying this whole time. I think the other thing that, as everyone was talking, and especially as Jean-Luc was talking, I think there is also this moment of recognition of intersectionality, and understanding that we're not just one thing, right? And even, his comment about Crispus Attucks, and it made me sort of consider how I had been taught about who Crispus Attucks was and what the role of Crispus Attucks was in sort of American history. So in understanding, the completeness of this person. I think that, Sherry put something in here into the chat about like how it translates to the global community. And I think that, one other thing that COVID makes us recognize, and I'd be interested in hearing from folks that are not in the United States, is how you're seeing this, is that we're all tied, right? We're all tied together. And that identity and the challenges that we're having in the United States, if you could say it that way, are things that, are deeply reflective of colonialism. And the United States is not the first place to be colonized. And frankly, there are other countries that have deeper colonial histories than we do. And so it actually is an interesting moment to really think about like who has the power. And so I don't know if I've said so many things, all over the place, Greg. You probably are like, I wish I didn't call in Dorothy.
That's all right.
But I do think it ties together in that I think, again, it still is, if the mainstream audience decides that this is the time for us to talk, we can talk. And if the colonizers say it's okay, then we have these conversations. And if they don't. And that's a real, that's a real challenge that we're having too.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of like help. So, the Fab Lab movement, like we're a collection of Fab Labs, we have a common cause, we have, access to technology, providing resources so that local community members can find solutions to their problems. But, we also want to make sure that international people are able to really talk and actually go back to Sherry's comment, how does this resonate globally? So when you have a situation like it's very concrete, like COVID-19, we saw a lot of projects come out of the network. But when it comes to a situation like Black Lives Matter, where it does resonate internationally, but we're trying to figure out, what specifically are, or perhaps like social interventions or projects or initiatives, like what are the local calls to action in regard to having, both of these crises going at the same time?
Yeah. So, it would be good to hear from people that are not U.S. based around some of these questions, and I'd just like to open it up now for you to give you some space to do that. Forgive me because I don't know all of you.
Can I'll call on Cindy Kotala, perhaps. She has some thoughts.
Yeah, random thoughts. I appreciate that there are these opportunities to have these kinds of dialogues. I've actually lived all the time in settler colonizer states, Canada and Britain, and now have been half of my life in Finland, which has its own issues, but it raised important questions here too. European nations often have this idea that there is an ethnicity, especially small countries like Finland. There are Finns, and people who come from elsewhere are not Finns. But of course, we have generations of, for example, many years ago, Somalian refugees moved here. Their kids are Finns. They're born here and they moved here. But there's still a lot of there are a lot of employment barriers, for example, education barriers that education systems, where I work, academia, we have a joke that it's hashtag design so white and so on. And so these are the questions that we're facing. In Finland, we do have, when it comes to gender issues, the struggle is there, but it's we're doing quite well, I have to say, thank goodness. Our makerspaces and fab labs have pretty good representation. But I think that the class and race issues, the intersectionality of those, I think is something that can be considered, because there's such a good opportunity for free spaces, fab labs, hack labs. I don't know, because I think that these efforts are political, and for so long we have been pretending that they aren't political. And then at the same time, I've noticed that in some hack labs, when they are apolitical, it almost creates a free space for anybody to come in and be able to be there and be creative. So I think that there's that tension that Fab Lab and Makerspace managers deal with inclusion and whatever freedom means. I'm rambling because I think that
no problem.
Issues.
No, totally understand. Following.
I did promise Nathan that he would be up, but I wanted to also pick up on Dorothy's point about sort of the intersection of COVID-19 response, but then also the protests that are going on. So locally, actually, what we became aware of at NACOP was the need for, when protesters are arrested, there are times when local law enforcement agencies will confiscate their masks and then not give it back to them. And so then then there was sort of a double need. So yeah, there actually is like a call to action as far as like face masks and PPE when it comes to like this time that you know that I was aware of. So thank you for bringing that back up, Dorothy. Nathan had a comment about Tulsa.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think this word intersecting really resonates with me. We're seeing that here locally. As you might have seen a couple weeks ago, the our Native American population. The US Supreme Court ruled that we are still, at least the federal laws, ruled by the tribes that are here. So I'm actually in Creek Nation and have been my whole life and never knew that. And so there's even a kind of a groundswell of support that we need to be adding Creek Nation to our mailing addresses in recognition of that. So in addition to city and state and zip code, adding Creek Nation underneath that. So we'll see how that goes. We also, if you've been following the news, are coming up on our 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so Tulsa as a city actually works quite well. Internally within ourselves, we, our constituents and our different groups actually communicate very well. So our African-American community, our Hispanic community, Latinx community. But what we recognized about 5 or 6 years ago is that we were going to have a massive amount of attention put on us as we mark this anniversary. What's interesting is we actually thought it would come next year, which is the 100-year anniversary, but it came a year earlier, primarily through 2 things: the Black Lives Matter movement really focused attention on it, and then also President Trump deciding to hold one of his first back to the campaign rally here. And so one of the things I will tell you that's kind of made interesting is it's very difficult to live in a city with a shameful past. And for 100 years, the instinct has been to push it under the rug and to not talk about it, to not teach it, to not understand it. But this anniversary has forced us as a community and as citizens and people to look it straight in the face and to face it. And not only that, to have an answer for it. Are we still the same people? Are we still the same community? Does this represent us? And because of that, I actually think we're in a much better place. And a lot of things kind of had to align. We have what I describe as our first 21st century mayor right now. It's unfortunate we didn't have someone like that earlier. To give you an idea of perspective, you know, our lab's in a place where the average income here is about $18,000 a year. So I remember our first Facebook post was from someone who visited us, and they said, "Great place, too bad it's in the ghetto." And so we just thought they didn't get it. But even today, so about a mile away from our lab right now, they're actually digging, looking for remains for the race massacre. So it's very much something we're talking about, but it's also something we're dealing with. And I think that that's really the thing. So all of these are kind of intersected at the same time, but instead of burying it, not talking about it, not addressing it for really the first time, we're taking it head on. I also think it could have a little bit to do with generations, and we just have a different group of people taking over. And so I'm actually really hopeful. And like I said, it's not something you want to walk in to meet friends and have to talk about, but we've had to do it. And it's really changed the way we talk to each other because of that.
Jack Kahn.
Yeah, thanks. And I've seen one of my colleagues is on this call as well. Hey, Katie. So I work in a big urban high school, and we have a huge amount of diversity. And one of the things, as one of the people speaking already said, that I see as one of the real challenges with working with high school students is many of them really haven't had the opportunity, for whatever reason, to work with a lot of technology. And so just even, you know, they're like, they can do much more on their phone than I can do on my phone, right? But things like, you know, so I see as one of the barriers, you know, like we're working on how do we help them, or how do we, whatever, help isn't even the right way, but how do we create something where the things are more accessible, maybe through your phone, or, you know, accessing how to use some of the tools in some of these different ways, or teaching and figuring out how to get more of the computer-based skills that students need, so that rather than, you know, I'm in the high school level and I really actually have to teach students how to save a file. And if that's sort of like a thing that needs to take a step, it just means we're how much farther till getting into some of the other things. Not that that's not important. So I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on sort of that. And the other thing that I'll mention is one of the most it was the craziest but also very fun days that I had this past school year was we made Black Lives Matter shirts, and the kids loved it. And I think having like community events like that can be welcoming, or, you know, I had more people in my classroom than I'd ever had, just like people ever, you know, it got the interest and thinking about like what are the things. So I think I love t-shirts as a way to do that. And I think both then it has like a message that's outward facing when you have this thing, and it's a pretty good kind of like way to get people into the Fab Lab. But yeah, if anyone has any comments on any of the things that I've said, I would love some feedback. Thanks.
And I think Natrice's comment that she just entered, especially when we're talking about K through 12 engagement, we're thinking about the youth. Here's a couple of comments. So allow underrepresented groups to bring their assets, their culturally sustaining practices, and knowledge into Fab spaces. It has to be supported and valued. And address youth self-concept in Fab education. They have to believe and see themselves as fabbers, makers, before they engage in Fab Lab activities. So thank you, Natrice.
So Jean-Luc, did you want to call on anybody else before we moved on to the next question?
I think we can move on to the next question.
Perfect. So I wanted to just ask about disparities that folks see in their local communities as it relates to COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, and sort of any interconnections or connections they see around those disparities, excuse me. So the question is, you know, disparities in your local community around COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter.
I'll chime in. So yes, you know, Boston has had a very long history of disparities. And most of the disparities that have come out have been around the healthcare, access to healthcare, and especially in, you know, the Black and Brown communities, people, and especially around a lot of the new immigrants, the new people coming into the country, coming into the city, and not getting access to healthcare. Even though Massachusetts was the first to mandate health insurance, it still is, even though I could get health insurance, you know, I had to get it. It didn't mean that my service, that the care I was supposed to get was going to be the same care as those communities that tend to get, have better care. And, you know, you know, even now, because I'm one of the few Black women that are not on any kind of medication, I've heard from my medical professional, wow, that's really, you know, it was like, you were expecting me to be on medication. You were expecting me to not be healthy. So, you know, that to me, you know, and I had to call them on that, because I felt like, you know, you want every, you know, this is the only way you're going to make your business is off the backs of, you know, Black and Brown people, but you're not even giving us the, you know, the good care. You're not following up with us. There have been a study that shows that that the medical community does not follow up after a Black patient has come in with, a serious condition. They don't follow up, or they wait for a couple of months before they follow up. So, so yes, this COVID has brought out a lot of disparities, and has shown that even just getting, which has prompted a lot of the organizations like NACOB and the Southern Technology Center to start the movement of creating the face mask. And they worked with another organization, a local, what was it, Jean-Luc Liberation Socialist Group. But anyways, they got to disseminate to the other essential workers, as well as anyone who wanted them. And they didn't sell them. If people wanted to make a donation, that was great. But, it really brought out a lot of this disparities in the health care system, and who was going to get tested. People were afraid to go get tested. It showed over in a community here in Massachusetts called Chelsea, where the number of people that they claim were positive, a lot of them did not want to get tested because many of them felt that the ICE or ICE or whatever you call it was going to come after them, because they thought people were, going to report that they're immigrants, that they're not full citizens. So they didn't want to get tested. They didn't want, so this really, I don't know, it just showed its ugly side of healthcare, and who gets it, and so, I think it was great that a lot of the FAB network, took up the cause to create, to make these masks in many different forms, whether it was the shields or the fabric, and even a lot of them, corralled other labs and their own makers, local people, just to get on the, to help out. So, the network definitely stepped up on this, and, but my concern is that when this virus abates to some extent, what's going to happen? And, what's going to happen in the healthcare field? So I'm going to leave you all, but I will catch the recording later.
Okay.
I've got to do I'm a caregiver, so I got to take care.
All right.
Pam, thank you so much. Thank you so
welcome.
much. Really appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
You stay safe. So yeah, so I wanted to definitely pick up, Pamela did mention that there were several partners within the Boston area, of course. There's FAB at CIC, the Boston Area Mask Initiative, the Party for Socialism and Liberation that work very closely with the Southern Technology Center. And also, in terms of distribution networks, NACOP, we worked with a local grassroots organization called Mayans Without Borders, and also a church of Quechua speakers from Ecuador. So dealing within the intersection of immigration issues, but then also rights of indigenous peoples, and trying to get those resources out to those different communities. I did want to bring in Jason from Vancouver, just to get another international voice in the conversation. Perhaps to talk a little bit about health disparities, economic inequality, perhaps even navigating the digital divide. So Jason, are you there?
I'm sort of here.
Okay.
I won't be able to share my video because I'm still at my home wearing my pajamas. Waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning is just a bit brutal. So, For me, unfortunately, well, fortunately, let's say this way, Vancouver is a pretty inclusive place. So there is, I assume, a lot less that kind of racial imbalance between men and women in Vancouver. We do start to see, we do still have the movement, the Black Lives Matters movement going on. And compared to the rest of the world, it's quite a peaceful protest. So lucky for us, we don't got that much. And as for Fab Lab, I guess because I'm the face of there and I'm Asian descendants, so it's, I would like to say that the community is very welcoming for people with colors, and also having me at the front of as the face of the Fab Lab is sort of barred out anyone who is I don't say racism, but have different opinion about people with colors. So yeah, so we're pretty fortunate here and haven't encountered any major issues. There's like one or two incidents who are people just coming and yelling at us. But I think that's more because of the COVID situation and the mask wearing. At the beginning of the COVID, mask wearing was, mask wearing was putting on an equal sign with Asian sort of, how do I say this? They put a tag on people who wear masks as like, because most Asian, if they came from an Asian country before, they have the habit of wearing masks because of the air pollution we had in Asia. So those two incidents are only related to that when people are not fully aware the effectiveness of the mask, and then I assume people are just stressed out. So things haven't happened again when the media and for the government jump out saying that mask is in fact effective. They are still non-believer, but now it's more like a non-believer for mask instead of a racial thing. So that have been getting a lot better. So yeah, lucky for us.
Yeah, but so what I'm hearing, especially from Pamela, from you, Jason, is that there is perhaps like some levels of stigmatization when it comes to getting tested for COVID, when it comes to wearing your mask in public. Those are some of the things that people have to kind of navigate. I did want to turn to Christy, who had some thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. I'm from Aruba, from the Caribbean here. So we have a interesting post-colonial society as we're still part of the Netherlands. And I think this point in time has brought it up specifically. But first, I wanted to share in the context of health that on like May 14th, I was like listening to a podcast, Today Explained, and they were talking about the Kawasaki disease. And they mentioned just casually in the podcast that 2/3 of kids found with Kawasaki disease, which is how COVID expresses itself most commonly in kids, were of Afro-Caribbean descent in England. And I freaked out. So I'm in the Caribbean, and so like, you know, a lot of the people around me and the people I care about are Afro-Caribbean, and it was just super casual, which not 2/3 of people in England are of Afro-Caribbean descent, right? And so that same night, this was when things were like really bad in New York, and there are a lot of Afro-Caribbeans in New York. The mayor in New York made a public announcement about Kawasaki because this was very new, and all of the presentations of how to recognize it were of white kids, even though the majority of cases were in Black kids. And so again, this is like, I was just freaking out. So I called some friends in New York, and asked them, please share this among the Afro-Caribbean community, because like it's so important, because it's like they mostly saw it as like purple toes. So it's like a skin affected thing that you see. So obviously it's going to be like super different if you're black or if you're white. So I think that this is like when we talk about like the positive sides and stuff, but it's like really killing the community. So I have a very hard time about seeing it in a positive light. So I wanted to share this experience also for us to be aware. Like, I think if we're working with kids, you know, that we can also share these things and like these diseases and how they present themselves in different ways, even in being noticed. Especially again, when we work with kids. And I think a very big part of that, and also like being recognized, is just like having multiracial staff. Like I noticed when I work and I'm working with one of my teammates who's a guy, that the girls always come to me, right? They would rather hear from me, and they're scared sometimes to work with the guys. And I notice also like we have very multiracial staff, and you'll notice that the black boys go to Manuel when he was here, or to Alexander, you know, and it's very important that they see this. And I think that in how we manage our makerspace, it's very important that we, especially when working with kids, that they recognize themselves in the people who work in the makerspace. I've talked to a friend a few weeks ago, and I was telling him like, dude, your team is so white. And then he was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody wants to be hired by the color of their skin. So I just picked the person I think is best for the job. And I'm like, it's so much more than that. It's going to affect your whole perspective. And you know, there's all these structural things. So maybe if you are more open to that, that person could be like way more awesome than you're measuring right now, because you're also hiring with all of these biases. I would want to add one more thing on the Kawasaki disease. Like, okay, so when this was happening, it had ravaged through Italy. It had ravaged through France. France has big Afro-Caribbean communities. They were not collecting this data. So right now we know these things because England and the United States have done the effort to collect this data. There's a lot of places where this is happening and we don't know. You know, we don't know who's being worst affected. And so that's also a part where it's so important that we share this data and be critical, because it's hard. It's sometimes easy to be critical when you have that data and then you think that it's not happening in other places, but they're not even looking. And so I think that's like really important. I want to mention, like, we are right now, our economy collapsed like 90% because we're fully dependent on tourism. And so we're in all these negotiations with the Netherlands to bail us out. Like, we don't have any like water sources. So like we don't produce any food. So it's, you know, if we don't get bailed out, it's pretty bad, but we're probably gonna get bailed out. The way they did this, we have monthly challenges. And the first challenge they gave us in the middle of a pandemic was to reduce our expenditure on healthcare. So like this stuff happens and you don't hear about it. But we're having, I think in the United States also, I don't know if there's anybody out there who's from one of the territories from Puerto Rico to share their experience right now, where they're having like one of the peak cases. I know Nathan, we met in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and like that relationship where you're not even considered a full like equal citizen, and you're on a other territory where like you can't even like, you know, it doesn't matter if you're out there. It's so easy to cut off. And so I think that's also important to consider.
Thank you, Christy. Really appreciate that. I just wanted to do a time check really quick. It's 2:12. We wanted to make sure that we left some time, 15 or 20 minutes at the end for open discussion. So I just wanted to kind of move through the rest of the conversation a little bit more quickly. I'm sorry. So when we think about the leadership of your Fab Lab, how is it reflective of the local community? And if it is reflective or not, how do you think that impacts your mission? how reflective of the community is the leadership and staff of your Fab Lab, and how does it impact or not impact your mission? Daniel?
Well, it's interesting for us. I work at a college, and my colleagues, we run a fab space at the college, and we're working with a nonprofit to help set up a makerspace in Kingston, New York, which is in an area of the city that's a diverse, under-resourced, underserved community. And so, part of why I'm here is, we're helping to conceive of what this space is going to look like, and there's sort of a basic model, but I keep sort of questioning whether when you're working with an under-resourced community, whether a fabrication space is really what's needed, and whether there needs to be a much broader mission, and one that has to be somewhat more overtly political in order to address what the speakers were talking about this morning of an extremely biased system against both minorities and just poor people in general. And of course, I'm grappling with the fact that I'm a middle-aged, white, straight guy trying to help build a space that is supposed to be representative and open to the community. So I got a lot of questions, and I was here today to sort of learn from other people's experiences, and try to. I hate the idea of making the mistakes that other people have already learned from. And I really appreciate some of the comments that I've seen about, just in the operating documents of the fabrication space, really designing it to be an open and inclusive, in its charter and how we describe it and how what it's supposed to be. The one thing that occurred to me, and I was wondering if, one of the things, I'm a scientist by background, and and of course everyone's holding out the hope that there will be a vaccine relatively soon. And one of the things that is really disturbing is the large percentage of the population who have sort of indicated that they don't want to take the vaccine. And I've also seen, at least some data that suggests that the distrust by minority communities for the healthcare establishment and for government in general, that they're even less likely to take the vaccine. And for those of you who have makerspaces or fab labs that are work with a diverse community and are trusted by that community, have you thought about helping to get people over that, or because I realize that distrust is there for good reason, but at the same time, since the COVID is hitting minority communities a lot harder, the vaccine is even more important for people to take. And I'm trying to look for sort of a broader role of what a maker space or a fab lab can have in the community. And coming at it as a scientist, I look at sort of trying to build trust in areas where science is should be the guiding principle, but often gets hidden behind politics.
I think, is anybody here from Fab Lab Caracas? Oh, okay. Oh, that's you then. Yeah, so I know you're the volunteer, but do you have anything that you could add to this?
I will try to speak only English.
Okay.
Yeah, I have listened all the comments of the people here in the meeting. Latin America and I think Venezuela have I think a different reality because I heard as you refer to people like white people or black people, and here for example we are like or we work like we are the same. We don't have those like difference to say people you are white or you're white. And for example, in our space here in Venezuela, we work with all like race, or we work, for example, we work with white people, as you say, or with black people, and we don't have those discrimination, you could say, to apply for a job if you are a color people, and we don't see like those difference here. Even we have an Indian community because as you know we have the Amazon, so we have some people from those areas, and there they work like any Venezuelans, even they are like Indians. So I'm really worried about all the comments that I heard from you, and I think in Latin America we have in some countries, not in all the countries, but we doesn't have those barriers. I think we are like more or we work more like in unity. And so.
Okay. So how do folks think we can foster leadership and staff in our Fab Lab that's reflective of the communities that we're in? So if we think about reflecting the communities that we're in, you know, in any sort of diversity dimension or inclusive dimension, you know, how can we foster leadership and staff that's reflective?
And I think Katie Perry had a thought on this in the chat. So Katie, if you're willing to jump in.
Sure, just a second. I wasn't really prepared to talk, but I will. So one way, well, the school that I teach, our mobile Fab Lab is at, is very culturally, ethnically diverse. And I don't necessarily fit that diversity in the same way. And a lot of our district's initiative is to help build structures and maintain structures and grow structures to bring the community together and to reach out in ways that are culturally responsive and inclusive of all. One of the ways that I find that is a doable way for us, because we just can't hire more and more people to help run our lab, is to encourage volunteers and mentors and other teachers who are more closely related to the ethnic realms of our students and the community, that show interest and they want to be there and inspire the makers in the same veins that the makers want to be inspired, and to also encourage the students to then also take on more of the leadership roles themselves. The maker spaces, noting and praising and lifting up those students who can help each other by leading the projects, by teaching the techniques digitally and using the machines. It's putting that context even more real for the students in our mobile lab in the schools to say, oh, I can do this. Let's be passionate about this. I'm gonna come to you for help because you are like me. I understand where you're coming from. And then the students who are those those mentors or those leaders in our projects with the lab will then, as they move on to into their own adult world, will become makers and fabbers in their own communities and continue to spread the talents that they have. And also just giving the students who want that to present what they're doing in a larger audience, to show off the diversity of projects that our students have created, that our makers are creating. We also open our doors to the greater community. Students can bring their families in the evenings once a month. Our faculty and staff come in, and it's inspiring them to want to teach their students in the makerspace itself. So that's just.
And Andres Moniz, I hear you're like the neighbor to Katie in the Zoom, so I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to this question. I'm not sure if you're still able to hear. Let's see. Joanna Okerlund?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation, so thanks for sure for everybody who's shared and a lot of interesting ideas. Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I was thinking in my head about how to connect this more concretely to the conversation here. But I've been thinking about like the language that I use to describe the makerspace, the language I use when people walk in the door and I'm like showing them around. And this goes back to something that Dorothy had posted in the chat, that maybe we need different ways of talking about things, different ways of sort of capturing that. And I haven't figured out how to fix it, but I do know some flaws in the way in which I introduce things. Right, sometimes somebody walks in the door and I say, oh, look at these machines. Like with the laser cutter, you can make flat things. And with the 3D printer, you can make 3D things. And look at all this cool stuff that you can make. And that's kind of the extent to it. But I mean, that puts all of the, you know, a lot of pressure on that individual. It's very focused on the things, but rather a shift might be, you know, here's what we're doing, or let's think about what we can do together, or let's think about the impact that we can have, right? Shifting that language that we use like right at the start might sort of put different ideas in people's heads, put different perceptions, and sort of change the culture about how we talk about what we're doing, to not focus on like the things in front of them, but make it more common to think about like the impact that those things might have.
Anybody else you wanted to call on, Jean-Luc?
We can go to the next question.
Sure. So thinking about your local community, how does your local community interact with the international network, the International Fab Lab Network? Are there examples that you all would like to share about how you get your local community involved and interact with them? Sarah? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I am typing that I am just out of power and I have to go find a cord.
Okay.
I got in the same room with Sherry because we were getting feedback, but I'm in a cubicle with no power. So I will try and get a cord and I'll come back.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Sorry
no
about
problem
that.
at all. No, totally fine. How about Lena? Lena Monaco? How about Julia Hansen?
Hello. Thank you for calling on me. I also, well, I personally feel as a white, straight woman that I have so much to learn in this conversation. So just wanted to preface my comments with that, and that I really appreciate this meeting having been organized. But I sort of just reflecting, my thoughts are still on the previous question actually. And I'm just reflecting that in my case, I'm with a makerspace that's based at Cambridge Innovation Center, which is a shared co-working and office center in downtown Boston. And our lab, I think pretty well reflects the makeup of CIC as a whole, which is to say it's very white. And I think there's like an element of diversity, and I think the organization as a whole is trying to make changes, but that comes very slowly. And so the way that trickles down to different departments or different teams within CIC takes, I think it takes a long time. And so as the Fab Lab manager at CIC, I'm really interested in finding ways that, that may seem, I don't know, rightly or misguidedly like radical, as ways to make sure that we can maybe override the systems that we have in place that we've sort of like inherited about how to charge for membership, how we advertise, how we display projects, how we promote our members and their projects. I think it's, our business as normal has led to having a very white male membership in our makerspace. And I'm wondering and hoping to hear ideas from this group as well, are like, what are the things that we can do right now that do not solve the problem? This problem will take many years and tons of effort to really make improvements on, but are there specific things that we can do right now that will make a difference, and that can like, number one, just increase the number of people of color who have access to our space and who feel welcome, and also through those actions send a message so that more people feel like this is a place that that is for them. Just one of the ideas that I would appreciate feedback on is just thinking through while we're having these conversations is like, what if we gave a free membership to every person of color who walked in through our door? Would that be sustainable? Would that be the right message to send? Again, I feel very like a novice in having this type of conversations. Any type of feedback on these types of ideas, which are definitely not our business as usual. I would love to have that conversation.
Well, let's do it. Let's open that up. I think that's a great question. And it actually folded nicely into one of the questions that I was going to ask about working together and coming up with some strategies and ideas. But since Julia has already put that out there, how do folks feel about the idea of one of the strategies being potentially offering free memberships to people of color? And how that would work?
That's a tough one. I would probably, just based on some of the conversation that I've seen here today, I would probably go more in the direction of, well, I would offer things for free, but I would probably go more in the direction of programming, like taking, an artisan or a crafter from the community that I'm trying to, to bring in, or a bunch of them, and like offering a series of, maybe free and open to the public, either workshops or sessions where they present, where you put them in a role of leadership, and also in a, they're very desirable to their own community, what they're doing, and that you're also showing that you're embracing the kind of activity that they do, right? In other words, you're bringing their culture into your culture or into your lab. I feel like that's probably a way to do it. And just sometimes when you offer things for free, it could be interpreted a little differently. It could be interpreted like, well, you're being patronizing or, you know, whatever. And so while we do want to make it accessible, absolutely, I think, it's just in my opinion, because I don't, you know, but I would try to elevate and feature, you know, people from the community that do things that are recognized and valued by that community, and offer that.
Jules, I saw that you just came back on the screen. I wanted to give you the opportunity to provide some feedback on either anything that you had heard before or this idea that Julia and Sherry just talked about in terms of how we're going to attract a more diverse membership to Fab Labs.
Yes, hello, my name is Jules. I'm from Montreal, Canada. I work in a Fab Lab in a public library, so for teenagers. So the thing we have difficulty, we have a great diversity of people because we're in the downtown area. So there's a lot of people from everywhere. And well, the fact of only working with teenagers, it's actually difficult to have some kind of, how do you say? My English is not so good, but to have teenagers that really get involved in the lab. So we're searching for ways. So what we've done, for example, like you said, the idea of getting more people, it's having, so if we're making an activity, so we made, for example, this activity that's in English, it's Women Who Code. So we invited women who work in the technology field, and we just like really make marketing, targeting girls to come, but boys were always also allowed in the activity, but it's really to like target the people. I want to do also a club for entrepreneurial club, but for Black young person. So really like try to come and make their business. So our service is already free because it's a public library. People don't pay for anything. So this is like some kind of ideal context that I know that not all the labs have. So we don't have this problem. But I think the idea of really like targeting audiences, and we also have a podcast where we have, and we try to have a diversity of people who come to talk. So from the LGBT community, from the First Nations in Canada. So this is a way we have people who come to talk about their experience, their work, and to inspire young people who maybe don't know what to do in life, don't want to go in art, or so they come and they talk about their experience. But we're not making a statement, but we're just trying to really have a diversity in the people who comes to talk to us. So there's no statement. If they want to talk about this, for example, we have a trans woman who makes music. We're not talking about the fact that she's trans, but if she wanted to talk about it, she'll talk about it. Just, but yeah, so for me, but we're still working on it. We're like I said, just having like really a reach to teenagers in the neighborhood. It's already a work. Then be inclusive. I think we still have a lot of work to do. We're still trying some things, but we're seeing if it's hard also to see the result of. I think this is something that is difficult. It's to see the result that it has on inclusion. I've only been there for 1.5 years, so I don't know. Maybe in 5 years, some projects that we do and redo, we'll know. But for a project that we made one time, for example, maybe this girl that wasn't not really interested in technology came, and now she's interested. But I think this is also another problem or a défi or a challenge is to really try to see or to having a proof of the impact that we have. This is a work we have to do too. So we come with good intentions, we make projects, it sounds good, but how do we know that it really has an impact? I think this is another thing that we're trying to figure out right now. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, I'm back. I live in a very, very rural state We are the 6th largest state in the United States in terms of land area, and we only have 2 million people. We have huge issues with poverty, lack of education, and with broadband, which has been a huge problem during the coronavirus. Our state is very, very poor. We have a little center of film in Santa Fe where my lab is located at the community college and at the higher education center, where we have George R.R. Martin and lots of fabulously wealthy people, and that's what the tourists see. But what they don't see, and Lass knows this, when I take people from the airport into the town, we go past the trailer parks and we go past the extreme poverty that there is in New Mexico. And so what I found when I got there was in our lab that is in Santa Fe, that 3/4 of the students in the community college had to work 1, if not 2 jobs. About 15% were homeless. And we started a program where we could, I mean, it's nice to come in and say you can come and play in the Fab Lab, but these people need more than playing, they need employment. And so we started, because I came from manufacturing and had experience, we have a little sister company on site that allows us to hire interns. And our interns work 20 hours a week. Some of them work 10, but most work 20. And we have between 4 and 6 interns per semester, including the summer. And they make $20 an hour, which for New Mexico is a huge amount. It's far beyond the minimum wage. And it has really helped our Latino students and our Native American students, which is the bulk of our population. I think the city is 58% Latino, to really have motivation for coming into the lab. You know, it means, wow, not only do you get to play with 3D printers and with laser cutters and fun things like that, you also get to be able to support yourself. And it means that our students don't have to go get a job at McDonald's, they can have a job actually working in our field. And we just recently filed a Department of Labor application with IBM for an additive manufacturing. And that was where the actual funding had come from. So that's why we started with additive for an additive manufacturing specialist. And through the Urban Institute, it looks like we'll be able to get funding where people can start at $38,000 a year while they were going to school and doing learn as you go. So I think also presenting economic opportunity in the Fab Lab, and whether it's through entrepreneurship or whether it's through apprentices or interns, you know, gives people even more motivation to be in the lab. And then as those people get more training, they can climb that ladder of getting to the leadership positions.
Mm. Sherry or Jean-Luc, did you want to pull forth any comments from the chat?
Well, really quickly, I wanted to kind of build on the employment aspect. I did see Andres turn on his camera, so I don't know if he had some comments, but I do want to just kind of build on the employment aspect. So from South End Technology Center, there is the Learn to Teach program, in which youth are able to come into the lab. It's actually an application process in which they're actually applying for a job, which is funded through a program through the city of Boston. And of course, if I'm mangling the explanation, I'm going to hear it from Pamela. But this is a program in which students come in. learn how to use all of the machines within Fab Lab. So it's a bit of a, in a way, it's a modified Fab Academy, because the students are learning how to use all the machines, and then they come up with a final project which actually meets some sort of local need. All the while they are getting a stipend, and they're actually like on the job doing these projects and doing this learning. And then when they do go into college, then they come back as mentors to help the younger students. So there's sort of that there's that reciprocal relationship of like learning and teaching that's happening at the South End Technology Center. And then also at NACOB, we have a Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act program, in which we do everything we can to will empower our community members to gain full-time employment. A lot of that is how we actually build up skills. So in 2018, when we actually signed the MOU with Boston Makers, it was twofold. It was to do the skills acquisition piece, but then it was also to address the digital divide problem within the urban Indian community. So with the makerspace in the center, we were able to kind of negotiate a reduced rent in exchange for complimentary memberships for our community members, with the intention that they would use the makerspace to do skills acquisition, or if they had any kind of like program or initiative or class that they wanted to actually teach, they would have the access to that resource. Okay, Andres says no comment. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, Sherry, do you have anything to add to that?
You're on mute, Sherry.
Yeah, I see. No, not really at this moment, but I do like the idea of bringing in and paying young people so that they can model for other people. I think that's a really, really great idea. And you know, if you pay people to learn like they do in Teach to Learn, then I think that we found in that program that a lot of kids went into science and technology in school, but they also went into education, which I thought was super interesting, right? And sort of unexpected, because the process of mentoring and teaching others was so engaging, right? And so it just brought in a whole new population, and that population has just grown over the years. You know, every year that you do it, I think they teach like 30 or 40 young people a year that become the mentors for like 600 other kids, right? And that population has grown, and that they later come back, you know, bringing into their community both members from their community, but also the knowledge that they have learned out in the world. And so it's a beautiful kind of modeling process. You know, that's for kids. You know, is there something that you could do comparably for adults? I'm not sure. You know.
Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is turn the rest of this conversation less about moderation and focus, and turn it into a little bit of an open discussion as we come up on 3 o'clock, and really just wanted to sort of frame it a little bit around what we heard from each other, and what do we think the path forward is around inclusivity in our local lab and in the Fab Lab network as a whole. So this is really an opportunity, I think, to, you know, sort of put forth some specific ideas or ask any questions and engage in a little bit of a discussion in the time that we have left. One thing I did want to call out, though, Sherry, you had said something in the chat that caught my attention, and that was this whole idea of having the funder who might buy into the openness as a driver for inclusivity. And let me just drop that in the middle of the group and see how folks may feel about that, you know, as a potential way for us to partially address the inclusivity challenge that we might be facing. How do folks feel about that? And is it doable?
That's hard. I don't know how in other countries this works, right? How your funding models work. I think that this has become a very, very important in the US, but in other countries, do funders, you know, is that important to them? I just don't know. And or would they actually put, you know, money on the table for projects that really drove that? I mean, Lars is right. I mean, it's very, very kind of scary, kind of risky when when you operate on such a thin margin, right, to survive.
Melvin, do you have any thoughts?
Not specifically on that topic, but I do want to make one statement I think I have to make. I think that for me, there's a very clear distinction between when we talk about Black Lives Matters movement as opposed to talking about diversity and inclusion, and both are important and both are necessary. We need to do both. And I just want to make clear in my mind that when I speak about Black Lives Matters, I really want to give props to the Black feminist movement. And I want to be very clear that this is being driven by women the same way that the Me Too movement is being driven by women and Black Lives Matters. They're both Black women who are doing this and started this movement. So I think it's very important that we stop and reflect on that for a minute. And one of the things about the Black Lives Matters movement and what the argument is becoming, there is tension. And part of that tension becomes you have to respect the vocabulary and the language of the founders of the movement if you're saying you're an ally of that movement. And so I think that just like when I go into a space as a Black male and I'm speaking to some of the people in the movement, I have to leave my maleness at the door, right? And I have to understand that this is primarily a Black, female, lesbian-led movement. And that's very different for the Black community to handle and get a grip on. So we're working through that. And I think that it's important just to always recognize, and I can't be in a space and not give props to that. So I just want to make sure that that's always said in these kind of settings, if we're talking about the Black Lives Movement in this time. The only other point I make is that, and it's something that Blair said that was very profound earlier today. He talked about the notion between being sustaining, disruptive, and transformative, right? And I think that example for me would be a disruption would be bringing fab tools and pedagogy into a school space, right? Transformative to me would be identifying and targeting those communities that lack these resources and finding ways to make sure that those resources are given in those spaces. So, and I'm sort of more in the transformative modus right now. And I think that, by the way, I'm a consultant at the Faire Foundation, if just by definition. And we're struggling with this. And the one thing I do respect a lot about what we're trying to do is that we are having honest, hard conversations about these issues. And I love the fact that Sonia, I think she's at another meeting, but Sonia brought me into this, and Sonia's a Black woman. So it's just, when you think about that, it's very cool to look at things like that. And the fact that Sherry's a woman, it's a very interesting space to be in. So I think that I just want to be clear about that distinction.
Very strong. Even though we are very recognizing the issues within the overall tech space, like we're very appreciative and recognize and uplift our women who are in leadership positions within this movement. There is no way that we can go from that comment and not turn to one of the women on the call just to respond. If there's anybody that would like to jump in. Let's see, we have Sonia, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. I just left another session, so I'm sorry it's taken me a minute just to get situated.
Okay.
But I'm here. Thank you all. It's good to be listening in and that we're having this discussion as a network.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to just pick up for just a quick second on what part of what Melvin said. You know, we watch the news and we see the media, and everywhere it says Black Lives Matter, and it's true. But you do have to look into the history. You have to do a little homework, right? You have to look into the history of how the Black Lives Matter movement started, and who started it, and what is the language that they use, right? In order to both respect it and to be able to discern, where you align and where you don't align, and how you support and how you become an ally, and where you become an ally. And so, he's so right. And, if you just do some research on, each of the organizations that's, that's very prevalent, in these discussions and in these issues, it's very, very helpful to help you both talk about and help you act in ways that are appropriately aligned for your beliefs and your culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Christy has some really interesting thoughts. Did you want to jump back into the conversation?
Sure. I think one of the things, we have like 2 labs. And so there's one part of our island that's majority Black. And what we noticed when we were moving around with the bus, so the bus goes to school, and we try to invite the kids. When you go to the school, all of the kids come into the bus, right? Like everybody that has a maker bus, I think, has that same experience. Because you go to a school, and then we invite the kids to come to the space. We experienced was that a lot of the kids that were from San Nicolas were saying that they wouldn't go to the main library because they had to take the bus, and they were just not going to do it. And so we opened a second lab. We found funding to open a second lab that was in San Nicolas, that was focused on that community. So I think I worked for a while in Jamaica, and it's a similar thing where it's much stronger in Jamaica than in Aruba. You have uptown and downtown. Uptown people don't go downtown. So, and sometimes you want to be inclusive, you got to go downtown, and I really like the idea to have the best things, and in maybe what people think is the worst neighborhood, right? So richer people have more mobility. Let them move, let them come, and then you just offer the best thing you can offer, and you do that you pay less rent, so you can lower your costs, and you still have the same advanced best projects you can give. Like we have workshops where we bring people from abroad, in programming AI and stuff, but we have them in an accessible space. So the people who are going to come, they're still going to come, and you just open them up, and then you have more of these interactions. Like one of the things you hear all the time about going to college, the biggest asset is not even what you learn, because you can learn that online, but it's the network you build. So creating those spaces where those networks can be built, and where people can empathize for each other and imagine each other's realities, I think it is also such an important element of the network. So when we opened, we're a Dutch colony. I went to college in the Netherlands, and people always act weird when you're from the islands. But whenever we bring technology, it always comes from the US or from the Netherlands. And so even if you go to the same school, you come back and they're like, oh no, we got to bring someone from abroad. And bringing, we made sure that we got some funding to bring people to teach us, because we didn't go to the Fab Academy. Instead, we brought Fabbers here, and to bring people that we thought that had similar experiences. And that's how we met Gabi from Olabi, and which is really an amazing lab, and they give a lot of free access to people from the favelas, and they have a project called Gambiera Tech, where they take the Fab Lab to the favelas and they do hacking of old stuff. And then they have the Trata Lab, which is really cool, which is focused completely on Black women. We invited interspecifics from Mexico, and Carlos from Fab Lab Puerto Rico, which is the first Fab Lab in the Caribbean. And they did a lot of, that's through them that I found out a lot about how Fab Labs can help reconstruction after hurricanes. And I think it's finding those sister labs, and also, like, as I said before, like showing that there is all this potential in our community really, really helps, because I feel other times we share stuff and it looks really awesome, but really far away, like something I could never do. And like making that jump to, oh, I can do that. I think that is more important than having like really nice tools. Like you could have tools that aren't that nice, but that people really feel like they can do something with it.
And Cindy, I saw that you turned your camera back on. You have probably less than a minute, but if you have like any final thought?
I don't necessarily, but I just turned my camera on because I felt like I wanted to, if we're closing soon, to kind of be a face in the crowd and just to say how much I appreciate what I've been hearing today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody that we haven't heard from want to jump in really quickly?
Closing remarks from Sherry and Jean-Luc.
I just had one thing I wanted to say. You know, I feel like we face a lot of enormous challenges ahead of us. You know, with the environment, you know, financially and socially. You know, we're in a terrible period. You know, just across the world. You know, financially, people are really struggling to survive, partially because of COVID, but partially because of the systems that we've built and the way that capitalism is just, you know, completely, you know, taken over and making the rich richer and the poor poorer, in essence, right? And a lot of us a lot of people are being left out of this conversation. And so I feel like in some ways, you know, all this technology development that we're experiencing is, you know, this rapid technology development is also driving us apart, right? It's making, you know, there are only certain people that are benefiting from technology development, and that we as spaces, makerspaces and fab labs and hackerspaces, you know, we have a role here in this inclusivity as we become more inclusive, you know, and as new populations are able to have access to the tools for invention and for innovation, that the kinds of challenges that we face are going to require diverse thinking and diverse development in technology and diverse minds developing that technology. And so I sort of see that in some ways as our role, right? Is one of the ways that we can be truly helpful is to provide these spaces where really diverse people can take control of technology development, take it back from, say, the, you know, few that have the levers of power now, and take the levers of power back to a more general population, a more equitable and inclusive, making a more equitable and inclusive world where everyone can survive. And so this is why I feel like this conversation, and not just the conversation, the action is so important to me. Sorry, Jean-Luc, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I think one of the things, and Julia definitely raised the question of like, what are the next steps? And I think that when it kind of like going back to COVID-19, we definitely saw that the network itself was sort of driving the direction of the projects, and there was like very little guidance as there usually is, like coming out of Fab Foundation or any central leadership, where we're just kind of like seeing like where the world is going and trying to like capture and basically tell that story. So certainly, you know, as far as next steps, you know, one of the things that would interest me personally is just kind of seeing, you know, what are the sort of like social interventions that are coming out of the network, in response to this moment, or even trying to navigate both this moment within the pandemic, and then how does that influence both? And then, you know, I absolutely think that, you know, this is the moment that we talk about when we read through Designing Reality, that, you know, social systems aren't evolving at the same rate as digital technologies. And because of that, we are at this moment in which those social systems are under stress, and they're under stress because our communities are asking for radical change, and they're asking for social interventions, and they're not necessarily things that are going to come from halls of power, but, you know, perhaps like community-based labs like those within the Fab Lab network. These are where we can plant and cultivate those solutions for, you know, the world that we are all moving towards. So thank you all for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, so much for guiding us, and thank you all for being here. And this is not the last conversation, we're just beginning, and it's certainly just the beginning of action. But stay tuned, because we will announce the next meeting will probably be at someone else's conference, but you'll all be invited. And this is really important work, and we really appreciate your time and thinking about it with us. So have a great afternoon. Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a session with Sonia tomorrow from 3 to 4:30. So if you want to see more of this face, head over to that one.
Yes, and join us tomorrow morning for Emergent Futures. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.